There comes a point in a woman's life when the noise around her gets too loud. The opinions, the expectations, the assumptions. Everyone has something to say about who she should be, how she should act, when she should speak. And for a long time, maybe she listened. Maybe she tried to meet every expectation, respond to every criticism, explain every misunderstood moment. But then something shifts quietly. Without announcement, she stops explaining, she stops performing, and she turns inward. Not out of anger, not out of defeat, but out of understanding. Understanding that not everyone deserves access to her energy. Understanding that peace isn't something found outside of her, it's something she builds within. So she chooses silence. She stops reacting to everything. She learns that not every comment requires a comeback, not every insult needs a defense, and not every misunderstanding is hers to fix. In that silence, something powerful begins to grow, because silence isn't weakness, it's restraint, it's dignity. It's knowing that maturity doesn't scream, it whispers. When a woman stays silent, people notice, they lean in, they watch closer. And while they're busy wondering what she's thinking, she's focused on herself, her healing, her growth, her joy. She starts pouring back into the cup she spent years emptying for others. And suddenly, things start falling into place. The fog clears. The truth speaks louder in the quiet. What once seemed confusing now becomes clear. What felt heavy now feels distant. She stops chasing closure from people who never gave her honesty. She stops needing validation from those who only saw her through their own broken lens. Instead, she turns inward and begins to rebuild. Not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove to herself that she never needed them to be right. This kind of silence isn't passive, it's powerful. It sets boundaries without shouting, it ends cycles without drama, and it commands respect without asking. Because when she no longer reacts the way she used to, that's when they realize something's changed. She's no longer available for emotional games. She's no longer entertaining what drains her. She's no longer waiting to be chosen. She's choosing herself. And it shows in her peace, in her presence, in the way she walks into a room, calm, grounded, clear, not needing attention, not seeking revenge, just focused on her goals, her healing, her alignment. And as she does, the things that once felt forced begin to flow. The people meant for her start to stay. The opportunities that fit begin to find her, not because she chased them, but because she became the version of herself that naturally attracts what aligns. That's the shift, the quiet one, the one that doesn't make noise but moves mountains. When a woman focuses on herself and stays silent, it's not about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. It's not about shutting the world out. It's about letting the right parts in. And that's when everything starts to fall into place. Not because the world changed, but because she did. Energy is one of the most valuable things a woman has. It's not just about physical strength or mental effort. It's about emotional presence, attention, and the space she gives to others. And not everyone deserves that. Not everyone has earned the right to her explanation, her reaction, or even her time. But the world doesn't always teach women that. Often, women are taught to be agreeable, to respond politely even when disrespected, to explain themselves over and over just to keep the peace. But peace built on exhaustion isn't real peace. It's surrender. There comes a point when she realizes that constantly defending herself to people who already doubt her isn't strength. It's a slow leak of her soul. Some people are committed to misunderstanding her. No matter how many times she clarifies her intentions, justifies her choices, or explains her feelings, they still twist her words, doubt her motives, or minimize her voice. And the more she tries to prove herself, the more drained she becomes. Her peace is stolen, not in big dramatic moments, but in the constant, quiet demand to justify her existence. When a woman begins to see her energy as sacred, she stops giving it away so freely. She doesn't react to every sideways comment or engage in every petty conversation. She learns that silence isn't losing, it's choosing. It's choosing not to hand her power to people who don't know how to hold it with care. Because the moment she stops explaining herself to people who are never going to listen, she regains control of her story. Not by shouting louder, but by pulling her energy back where it belongs. That shift changes everything. She starts speaking less, observing more. She watches who actually shows up with respect and who just shows up to drain. She becomes more intentional with who she allows near her heart and more careful about where her attention flows. This doesn't mean she becomes closed off or unkind. It means she becomes clear. Clear about what deserves a response and what doesn't. Clear about what matters and what simply distracts. Her energy no longer leaks into people who feed on drama. She's no longer performing for acceptance. She's no longer negotiating her worth. And that silence, the one that some might mistake for distance, is actually her strength, is her protecting her peace like a sacred temple. Because when her energy is protected, her mind becomes clearer, her emotions become more stable, and her vision becomes sharper. She doesn't waste herself proving points. She doesn't lose sleep trying to fix someone else's perception. Instead, she focuses on alignment, on what feels right to her spirit. And in that quiet space, she starts to bloom. Silence is often misunderstood. Some see it as weakness, others as avoidance. But for a woman who has grown through chaos, silence becomes a choice rooted in strength. She's learned that reacting to everything isn't power, it's distraction. When someone disrespects her, she doesn't need to yell to make her worth known. When someone misunderstands her, she doesn't have to correct every detail to feel seen, because the truth is, silence can say what words can't. It says, I don't owe you my energy. It says, I know who I am, and I don't need to explain it. That kind of silence is not passive. It's purposeful. It doesn't shrink. It stands tall. It doesn't give up. It lets go. The moment a woman realizes she doesn't have to respond to every accusation, defend every decision, or react to every provocation, she becomes more grounded. The noise of the world starts to fade. She no longer lets people pull her into pointless battles. She no longer allows toxic patterns to steal her calm. And what's left is space to think, to feel, to breathe. In that space, she reconnects with herself. She starts to hear the quiet voice inside that says, you don't have to fight to be respected. Just be still and let the truth rise on its own. People often try to provoke reaction because that's how they gain control. They feed off chaos, but when she chooses silence, she breaks the cycle. She doesn't give them what they want. She doesn't offer fuel to their fire. Instead, she preserves her dignity. She takes her power back without lifting a finger. And that frustrates people who thrive on drama, because they can't control someone who doesn't play their game. They can't manipulate someone who doesn't need their approval. Her silence becomes a mirror, and suddenly they have to sit with their own reflection. But this silence isn't empty. It's full of decisions. It's full of boundaries. It's full of clarity. It doesn't seek revenge. It seeks peace. It doesn't push people away with anger. It simply closes the door with grace. She learns that not every insult is a call to war. Sometimes the strongest move is no move at all. And with that strength, she begins to rise, not in loud ways, not in flashy displays, but in calm, steady growth. Her silence speaks volumes. It tells the world she's no longer available for things that dim her light. It tells people they don't have access just because they demand attention. In silence, she becomes more intentional. She listens more than she speaks. She observes more than she reacts. She processes without pressure. And in that quiet, she builds something unshakable, a presence that doesn't have to fight to be felt, a power that doesn't have to prove itself. Because when she chooses silence out of self-respect, everything around her starts to shift. When a woman starts to focus on herself, everything begins to change, not because the world outside becomes easier, but because her inner world becomes stronger. She stops living in reaction to others. She no longer asks, what do they think of me? And starts asking, what do I think of myself? That shift is everything. It turns her attention inward, not in a selfish way, but in a healing way. She realizes that the more she focuses on herself, the more she understands what she needs, what she values, and what she can no longer tolerate. Instead of spreading herself thin, trying to please everyone, she begins to nourish her own mind, her own body, her own spirit. It's not that she stops caring about people, it's that she stops overgiving. She stops abandoning herself to show up for others who wouldn't even notice if she disappeared. She starts checking in with herself. Is she tired? Is she fulfilled? Is she growing? Her focus becomes her own well-being, her own peace. And from that place of focus, she begins to move differently. She says no more easily. She says yes more carefully. Her time becomes sacred. Her boundaries become clearer, and she no longer waits for permission to rest, to grow, or to protect her energy. When she focuses on herself, her priorities realign. Things that once felt urgent start to feel irrelevant. She stops chasing closure from people who never gave her clarity. She stops hoping for apologies that never come. Instead, she focuses on her own healing. She reads more, she rests better, she moves slower. She gets curious about her own thoughts, her own patterns, her own dreams, and little by little, she begins to reclaim all the pieces of herself she had given away. This focus doesn't mean she isolates herself. It means she becomes selective. Not every conversation deserves her presence. Not every relationship deserves her effort. She learns that her peace is too expensive to spend on confusion. She doesn't beg for attention. She doesn't force connections. She lets people go without chasing. She lets silence do the talking when words aren't enough. And in that space, she grows, not because someone saved her, but because she saved herself. This focus becomes her foundation. It centers her. It reminds her that she is responsible for her own happiness, her own growth, her own peace. And when she starts pouring into herself, she notices that she has more to give, not from emptiness, but from overflow. She glows differently. She walks with more purpose. She just need to prove herself to anyone because she knows exactly who she is. Her silence and her self-focus become her power. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep, steady, and unshakable. Peace isn't something that just happens. It's something a woman has to choose, protect, and return to over and over again. And that choice often begins with silence. In a world that's always pulling her in 100 directions, telling her to speak, to prove, to defend, to argue, choosing to go quiet can feel like rebellion. But in reality, it's not rebellion. It's restoration. Because when she stops talking, when she turns down the volume of the outside world, she finally starts to hear herself, her real voice, the one that's been buried beneath expectations and noise. That's where clarity begins, not in the chaos, but in the calm. When a woman steps back from the noise, she gets perspective. She sees the situation for what it really is, not what her emotions tried to convince her it was in the heat of the moment. She stops being pulled by reaction and starts moving by intention. That space of silence becomes a mirror. It shows her what she's been avoiding. It highlights what she's been tolerating, and it makes room for the truth to rise, truth that can't be heard when everyone else's opinions are shouting over it. For her, when she sees what she's been avoiding, that's why silence is powerful. It's not emptiness, it's clarity. It's the space where lies fall apart and self-awareness is born. The more she honors that silence, the more grounded she becomes. She stops needing constant noise to feel connected. She stops fearing stillness. She stops chasing validation through conversations that go nowhere. And in that stillness, she remembers who she is. She remembers what matters. She remembers how far she's come. It's easy to get lost when life is moving fast. when everyone wants something from her, when expectations are heavy, but silence slows everything down. It puts her back in control, not by changing the world outside, but by calming the storm inside. This kind of peace doesn't mean everything is perfect. It just means she no longer allows imperfection to throw her off course. She becomes more emotionally steady, less reactive, more thoughtful. She learns how to pause before responding, how to breathe before deciding. And that pause, that breath, is where she finds her power. It's where she makes decisions based on wisdom, not impulse. She's no longer trying to win every argument. She's no longer proving her worth through how loud she can speak. She's proving it through how still she can stay. Silence becomes her strategy. Peace becomes her compass. And clarity becomes her reward. While others are still spinning in circles trying to be heard, she's already found what they're chasing. She doesn't need to talk about it. She lives it. Her calm becomes contagious, her energy becomes magnetic, and people begin to wonder how she does it, how she stays so centered, so composed, so clear. It's not magic, it's intention. She chose silence, not to disappear, but to reconnect. And in doing so, she found the truth that noise always tried to hide. There's a quiet kind of power in knowing that you don't have to announce your boundaries for them to exist. You don't have to raise your voice, make a scene, or explain your reasoning to protect your peace. When a woman becomes secure in herself, she realizes that boundaries don't need to be loud. They just need to be firm. And often the firmest ones are set in silence. She simply stops participating, stops answering calls that drain her, stops explaining herself to people who have never listened, stops showing up in places where she's only seen when needed, not valued when silent. That's how she enforces her limits, not by force, but by consistency, by simply no longer offering access where respect isn't returned. People notice, they feel it. At first, they might test her, push the edge, try the old games that used to work. But she doesn't flinch. She doesn't argue. She doesn't plead. She just pulls back, calmly, quietly, and when there's no reaction, no spark to light the usual fire, something shifts. Those who used to control her through chaos lose their grip. Those who thrived on her emotional responses are met with stillness. That's where true boundaries live, not in words, but in behavior, not in what she says, but in what she no longer entertains. She's not trying to prove a point, she's preserving her energy. Because every time she chooses not to respond to drama, she chooses herself. Every time she walks away instead of explaining herself, she reaffirms her value. It's not about making others feel small. It's about not allowing herself to shrink just to keep the peace. And the beauty of these quiet boundaries is that they don't ask for understanding, they require it. If someone truly respects her, they'll feel the shift and adjust. If they don't, they'll fall away naturally without her needing to push them out. There's freedom in that kind of silence, a lightness, because she's no longer bound by the need to be liked, to be accepted, or to be understood by everyone. She's no longer bending herself to fit into spaces that were never designed to hold her truth. Her silence doesn't create distance, it creates clarity. It separates what serves her from what drains her. And with that clarity, she moves through life more freely. She loves without losing herself. She gives without overextending. She listens without absorbing. Because her energy is no longer up for negotiation. And the most powerful part, she doesn't explain the shift to anyone. She doesn't post about it. She doesn't justify it. She just lives it day by day, quietly, intentionally, and the world adjusts around her. That's the beauty of silent boundaries. They don't demand attention, but they change everything. Not because others agree with them, but because she finally decided that her peace is worth protecting, whether they understand it or not. There's something sacred that happens when a woman chooses solitude. Not loneliness, not isolation, but intentional time with herself. It's in those moments alone, when the world isn't watching, that real transformation begins. Because growth doesn't always happen in the spotlight. It happens in the quiet. When she's sitting with her thoughts, confronting the truth, learning to love the parts of herself she used to hide. When a woman pulls her energy back from the noise and focuses on her own journey, she begins to evolve in ways that can't be explained, only felt. Her strength doesn't come from proving anything to anyone. It comes from doing the deep, quiet work that no one sees but her. In that stillness, she starts to notice things, patterns in her behavior, repeated lessons in her life, old wounds that still ache, dreams she abandoned, strength she forgot she had. She starts listening to herself, not the voice shaped by pressure or pain, but the one that existed before the world told her who she should be. And slowly she begins to rebuild, not for attention, not for validation, but for alignment. She clears space in her life, mentally, emotionally, physically. She lets go of distractions that used to numb her. She stops chasing people who made her feel like too much or not enough. And in that open space, something new starts to grow. Confidence that isn't loud but steady. Peace that doesn't need noise to feel real. Vision that isn't rushed but rooted. When a woman grows in solitude, her glow becomes different. It's not just the way she looks, it's the way she carries herself. She moves with intention. She doesn't rush. She doesn't settle. She doesn't explain her decisions because she knows what it took to become this version of herself. She knows the battles she fought silently, the nights she cried alone, the moments she almost gave up. And now she honors that journey by protecting her peace. She doesn't let just anyone into her space. She doesn't entertain what feels off. She doesn't tolerate what disturbs her calm. Her solitude has become her standard. This kind of growth isn't for show. It's not about proving she's healed. It's about no longer being available for the things that broke her in the first place. She trusts her gut more. She honors her feelings. She gives herself grace on hard days. She celebrates herself on quiet wins. She no longer needs a crowd to feel seen because she sees herself clearly, fully. And when others meet her, they feel it, not because she tells them, but because it's in her presence. In the way she speaks, in the way she listens, in the way she no longer reaches for what doesn't reach back. Her growth is personal. Her evolution is private. But the results are undeniable. She's becoming the woman she was always meant to be. Not because the world told her to change, but because she finally gave herself permission to rise. And in doing so, she no longer has to explain her silence or her focus. Her life starts to speak for her,